This is BBC Essex.
But now, prepare to hear the story of the real rock and roll swindle. This is Slowbone on Vintage Vinyl. Now, not so long ago, our Essex star was a guy called Stu Mills from the Essex band Hackensack. Well, on that occasion, tagging along was their manager, Pete Sarfas, who mentioned a band who came out of the Essex East End London borders called Slowbone from the late 60s, early 70s, who you may well have seen perform in the pubs and clubs around that area back in the day. They released a lot of vinyl on the Rare Earth label and are the subject of a new compilation album called The Real Rock and Roll Swindle. And Pete Sarfas joins me now again on Vintage Vinyl. Welcome.
Thank you.
The origins of Slowbone go back to the psychedelic 60s, don't they?
They do indeed, yeah. Like a lot of heavy bands that formed around the turn of the 70s, they had their roots very much in the sort of flower power, psychedelic pop era, the beat era. And it was no different for Slowbone. I mean, if you go back to sort of 66 time to North London, there was a band called The Brood that featured a very colourful character called Ewan Primrose. And he was a drummer and songwriter for The Brood, and a guitarist by the name of Jeff Peters, who became the long-standing bass player for Slowbone eventually. The Brood had connections because of their location in Fortis Green. They were literally right next door to the Kinks, so they became very friendly with Ray and Dave Davies, and they even cajoled Dave Davies into producing a couple of early demos, which was great. They knew Keith Moon. Keith Moon used to just turn up, start hammering away on Ewan's tom-toms and cymbals at rehearsals, as he'd expect from Keith. And then Ewan would dash out the next morning down to Carnaby Street and try and find a black and white cowpatch jacket that Keith had turned up in the day before, type of thing. You see, he was crazy. So The Brood, I mean, they had lots of interesting connections to well-established artists. Spencer Davis was another. They didn't get very far until they changed their name to Turquoise. With Turquoise, they became a quartet with an additional guitar player, bass player, and Ewan on drums. And they had some very, very good links and connections, and, you know, they wrote some good material. They had a publishing deal with Python Music, which was part of Apple, so they're connected to the Beatles. They were also connected to the Rolling Stones, in as much as at one stage they had a manager called Tom Keylock, and he was a tour manager for Rolling Stones and head of security, which meant that Turquoise were able to use the Rolling Stones rehearsal space and equipment from time to time, which was, quite handy for them.
Yeah.
So they had a publishing deal. They got signed to Decca, and as you'd expect in that sort of time, 67, 68, they were very much a product of their time, and they had two singles released by Decca. 53 Summer Street, backed by Tales of Flossie Phillip.
You'd never guess it was the 60s.
You'd never guess it was the 60s, would you? And then another one a bit later called Woodstock, no connection to the American Woodstock.
Yeah.
So everything was in place for them. The singles were actually quite good period pieces of sort of Britpop with catchy hooks, but I think it was a little bit too forced, trying to get the message across. They weren't quite in the same department as like Small Faces, Kinks, Yardbirds, that type of thing. But they were good period pieces, and they're quite collectible now. And they ended up going down to the West Country, doing a dry run of about 3 or 4 gigs there before they were unveiled in the capital, and got a residency very quickly at the Bridge House in Canning Town.
Let's hear the boys in action. The Last Goodbye is the first track you've chosen.
I'd just like to say that this track represents their early period, prog rock blues period. And Iron Maiden fans might like to take note, because if they're wondering where Steve Harris got the early ideas and riffs for the song Run to the Hills that appeared on their Number of the Beast album, then listen no further.
Once a young man, I'm wasting my time with a picture of you in my mind. I'm just an old man with pain from the blues that you left me, I can't seem to lose. From the window, I wait your return. One more time for this candle will burn out. Keep me crying and pour back tears. No, the memories of so lonely years. So never make this, so never make this the last goodbye. The news of your death in the paper. The car was burning, but no one would save her. But this girl was the part of my soul that you left when you started to go. From the window, I wait your return. One more time for this candle will burn out. Keep me crying and pour back tears. And all the memories of so lonely years. So never make this, so never make this the last goodbye.
Pete Sarfas is my guest today, talking about Slowbone, who that was, and the last goodbye. Wonderful music, and it's so sad when you hear great stuff like that and they kind of slip through the cracks, but the whole real rock and roll sort of thing, as you said at the start of that track, and similarities,
Yeah.
be they accidental or intentional, from Iron Maiden and, you know.
Well, like I said, the logo, which was ubiquitous in the music press back pages of Melody Maker, sounds, it was everywhere. You know, a few years down the line, did turn up in modified form on the first Iron Maiden cover.
Yes. Yeah, because Slowbone had the Crooked Man, didn't they?
They had the Crooked Man, which was like a sort of scarecrow, tramp type image.
Yeah.
But of course, a lot of the Iron Maiden members used to go and see Slowbone at the Cart and Horses, where they had a long residency. You know, you had people like Dennis Stratton, Paul Di'Anno, Steve Harris, Malcolm McLaren, Glenn Matlock. You know, it was just lots of people there milling around, lots of movers and shakers in the background looking for deals, lots of people trying to manipulate the band, really.
So why was it that they were influencing so many other people but not really getting the success that they perhaps deserved? Was it bad management?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of people who became quite well known in the music business. For a start, you had people like Peter Meaden, who discovered the pre-Who starlets, the high numbers. He was involved. Kenny Laguna, Alan Kirbishley, the footballer's brother, Bill Kirbishley. Lots of people coming and going and offering the band deals. Money going missing when an album was due to be recorded in 75. They came back from a short tour of Holland, went back into the studio to carry on recording, and the money had just disappeared, which is probably why a little bit further down the line there's a track called Where's the Money on the Roll-Ups album, which they turned into Roll-Ups after Slowbone folded. But this was like quite a long way down the line. For a pub rock band to survive without even a sniff of commercial success for over 6 years, well into the punk era. And I remember hearing a Slowbone single which took me by surprise in late 77, about October 77. This Radio 1 DJ suddenly announces a new Slowbone single, and I didn't even realise they were still going. Well, they weren't very much longer after that. But a track called Can I Bring You Love was fast-tracked onto the market, and it was quite a catchy, repetitive song, maybe a little bit too repetitive, but of course it sunk without trace because it was up against all of the punk anthems of the day. and it probably wasn't quite mean enough.
Yeah.
You know?
How did the deal with Rare Earth come about?
Well, Rare Earth was a subsidiary of Mo West, which is a Tamla Motown label. And so you had a hard rock band signed to a Tamla Motown label, you see, so that didn't really sound quite right. And I remember when Lea Hart at a live show said we got a new single coming out, and it's called Happy Birthday Sweet 16, which was a cover of a Neil Sedaka song, All Our Hearts Sank. But, you know, he did make up for it a little bit because their anthem, Tales of a Crooked Man, was on the B-side. It was just whatever was suggested at the time. It was just madness, really, you know. But at the bottom line is really that Lea Hart, the main songwriter, could write really good material, and with a lot of catchy hooks, good pop material. And he was a good arranger as well. And he was a good guitar player. The only setback really was his voice. You know, a little bit too high-pitched for most. But on the other hand, it made them sound unlike other bands. You know, they were up against a lot of one-hit wonder bands like Blackfoot Sue, the Arrows, the Rubettes. You had Sweet. One of their singles sounded a bit like the Beach Boys or Sweet, you know.
It was a crowded market, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And you had to have something that's going to jump out at you and make you go out and buy it. These singles sold quite well locally, but beyond, you know, the local market, they just didn't. They probably weren't even in the shop. If you went into a shop in Scunthorpe or Swindon, they probably wouldn't know what you were talking about. They're very much an East London Essex band.
Changing Ain't Easy.
Yeah,
is the next track. Tell us about that.
Changing Ain't Easy is a representative, really, of their more melodic side, and you can hear a lot of influences here from Mott the Hoople to Ziggy Stardust, Bowie era, and everything you can think of in between. But beyond that, it does present itself as an original composition. I feel it should have been released as a single at the time, but it wasn't.
Okay, Slowbone. This is on Vintage Vinyl, BBC Essex.
I miss the people's faces when the time had come to tell. I left the open spaces for a life for something else. Did they talk about me? Can't remember what I've done. Say don't get too close to him, he's a strange one. I'm coming home. They say that I'll change, but changing ain't easy. There's no way to free me. I'm coming home. They say that I'll change, but changing ain't easy. There's no way to free me. Memories only hold you when the future is too far. Remembering never told you who you really are. Yesterday a rainbow, but today is solid sky. They told me to take it easy. I'm an easy guy. Coming home. They say that I'll change, but changing ain't easy. There's no way to free me. I'm coming home. They say that I'll change, but changing ain't easy. There's no way to free me. Time to look at the time passing me by, falling behind me. Coming home. They say that I'll change, but changing ain't easy. There's no way to free me.
Music of Slowbone on BBC Essex. Did you see them back in the day around the Essex borders, East End of London, neck of the woods, the pubs and clubs around there? Do please let us know if you've got any memories. They should have been much bigger than they were, but through one thing and another and bad management and what have you, it wasn't meant to be. The Real Rock and Roll Swindle is the disc you can get out now from Pete Sarfas, who's my guest today, talking about the music of Slowbone and how they were poorly treated. It's a scandal. Do you think if things were happening today with the whole internet, digital way of making music and getting music out there, things would have been different for them?
Possibly. I mean, it was a whole different world back then. It was much more disorganised, spontaneous. I mean, bands used to set up their equipment and play under the arches, you know, or go busking and just carve out a niche somewhere, you know. It's hard to say, really, but Slowbone, in my opinion, were victims, maybe of their own poor decision making, but they were very young and they were easily influenced and a little bit gullible, you know, which is a shame.
Yeah.
But it happens. And I mean, a good example is one of the tracks they wrote called We're So Pretty, which is quite a standout number that Slowbone wrote.
It's sounding familiar.
Yeah. It did turn up in modified form a few years later as Pretty Vacant by the Pistols. It's quite obvious, you know.
We were saying while the music was playing about, litigation, that you kind of think, is there enough here to kind of sue and to take people to court for?
Probably not, because a lot of bands lifted other bands' ideas at the time, you know, and it was just the way it was, really, you know. But there is a new Slowbone CD coming out called Slowbone The Wonder Boys, and that will be available online from all the usual outlets, Discogs, Music Stack, eBay, Amazon, and it plugs the even more missing gaps in the Rock and Roll Swindle story that you can also get online. We've
said that, this is a movie in the making, if not, at the very least, a BBC4 documentary, I think.
Well, it's trying to cram in so much information, but missing a lot of pertinent and salient points because there's just so much to say, really. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a band who could have had good success. I'm not saying they would have been world beaters or remembered in the Musical Hall of Fame, but they could have been easily as big as, bands that had success in the mid-70s and are still remembered fondly. But Slowbone definitely fell through the net through no fault of their own. And when you hear the sort of product that they recorded back in the time, most of which never came out, you can easily see that they were a quality band.
It is a great shame, but we're keeping the music alive here on Vintage Vinyl and BBC Essex. Pete Sarfas, thank you so much.
Thanks.
BBC Essex.